also appreciate all of the work that you're doing at your schools. Right now, teacher leadership is more important than ever, and you guys are doing such an important job, so thank you so much. So let me just get the presentation so I can see it too. There we go. And today, like I said, we're talking about teacher resilience. This is a topic that I feel very near and dear to because it's something that I've struggled with in my career. And it's also something that is sometimes difficult to talk about, but the discussion is valuable and important because if we're going to keep teachers and if we're going to teach, we need to be addressing our resilience as often as we can. So to start off with, I want you to consider for yourselves, what do you already know about resilience? What preconceived notions and ideas do you already have in mind in terms of what resilience means for you? For some of us, it might be the idea of being more like rubber than glass. For others, it's the idea of being able to bend but not break in the wind. There are a lot of metaphors and ideas around the idea of resilience. But when we're talking about educators specifically, there is a very specific contextual definition because luckily for us, this is an area that's been researched a lot. There are many areas of education that are not super well researched, especially in the United States. But teacher resilience is one that's getting more and more attention. So in the context of teaching, the definition of resilience is the ability to navigate those everyday challenges in a way that promotes and leads to better engagement, commitment, agency, enthusiasm, and of course, well-being. Now, that idea of that word engagement is often heard in terms of how our students feel about being at school and the work that our students are doing. In this time, I want you to think about engagement in terms of yourself and your fellow teachers, your peers, as in their engagement in their profession. So we're not looking at this in terms of what the outcomes are for students. We're looking at this as far as the outcomes for teachers. And if teachers are practicing resilience and they're working on themselves, then we'll see that better engagement in their career, that greater enthusiasm to come to work, and lots of other great pluses. In terms of the things around us that promote resilience, there's two kinds of factors. There's personal factors and there's contextual factors. Personal factors that lead to resilience in teachers are your intrinsic motivation, self-efficacy, persistence, optimism, and interpersonal skills. And I know that if you're anything like me, you'd look at that list and say, optimism? I'm a massive pessimist in any way, shape, or form that you can define it. But at the same time, when I think about myself as a professional, I have optimism in my view of how my students might succeed, in my view of my own professionality, and how my projects will work out. Optimism comes in lots of different ways. The same is true of interpersonal skills. I don't tend to be a very social person. I recharge by spending time alone. But interpersonal skills refer to, again, that professional setting. In the school setting, do I have the skills that I need in order to be personal with others, to talk with others in a professional manner? Now, there's also contextual factors that promote better resiliency in teachers. When we're thinking about those contextual factors, those are the things around us in the school setting. Where personal factors are within us, contextual factors are the things around us that impact our resilience. So for example, if you have a school site that is supportive of teacher professional learning, that promotes positive relationships between colleagues and school leadership and develops communities that intentionally enable reflection of educational practices, those factors tend to lead to better resilience in teachers. So think about your own school site. Do you see these contextual factors in place so that teachers can begin building resilience? And if you don't see these factors in place, then how do you see that impacting your teachers now? These factors are very important if we want to create an environment that is really helpful for teachers to grow professionally, personally, and in their well-being. So this leads us to the idea of a resilient teacher. When we're looking for an educator who themselves are resilient, we see 4 different dimensions of that resilience. There's the professional, the emotional, the motivational, and the social. In the professional realm, that's essentially how the teacher evaluates themselves as an educator, how they see their own efficiency and their efficacy. It's also their competency pedagogically. When someone goes into a classroom and they feel as though they are pedagogically competent and that they can perform the teaching that's necessary, then they fulfilled that professional dimension of resilience. Then we can look at that emotional piece. In the emotional area, we have those positive emotions and emotional engagement. That essentially means coming to school, and despite the fact that life weighs down on us, we're able to come to school and perform emotionally with some positivity, perhaps a smile with our students. It also demonstrates when we have emotional engagement. So oftentimes, if you see a teacher that's struggling with resilience, they'll have a hard time being emotionally engaged in the workplace, and especially with their students. Then we have that motivational piece. Now, this is a big piece with a lot of moving parts. For a teacher who is working in that motivational dimension, we have their intrinsic motivation, their persistence, their expectations, and their goals. By expectations, I mean their expectations of themselves and their performance. This is all internal work. When I say persistence, that means how hard are they willing to push to get the results that they need? How far are they willing to go to get the materials they need for their students, or get their own personal needs met at work? And then we have that social piece. This is how well someone can form supportive relationships with their students and their colleagues. And this is a piece that's especially important to consider in the school setting in which we're all online. How are we able to fulfill that social dimension when we're all working online and supporting each other through a great distance? This is a piece that requires, especially now, a great deal of intentionality and reflection. So when you're thinking of what resilience looks like in your coworkers and peers, if you want the ideal vision of what a resilient teacher would look like, then these are some of the qualities. A resilient teacher is insightful. They're able to pull information and come to conclusions based on what they're hearing and seeing. They're also creative. This is the person that, when faced with roadblocks, will think of creative ways to go around it. In some research performed in Africa that helped inform this particular slide, the teachers that were being studied showed that creativity in how they were finding materials with which to teach, hunting through trash to find pieces of straws to build together to form atoms, searching for whatever materials they could find from local businesses, anything that they could. The idea of persistence is also in there, that idea of I'm going to keep going as far as I need to, and I'm going to keep pushing to get the results I want. Humor is also important. If a teacher is resilient, then they'll be able to laugh in the face of adversity. They'll be able to stop and have a giggle and share some humor. They're also determined, which goes along with that persistence idea. They take initiative. They show some optimism. And then we also have this idea of a morality or personal code. A teacher who's resilient will have a set of ideals and personal beliefs that help to inform themselves as a teacher and how they educate their students. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean some like greater purpose or a moral code that's passed down from elsewhere. This is something intrinsic that is very personal, such as a teacher who believes that any student can succeed if they're given the tools that they need, or a teacher who is driven by equity and social justice. Teachers who have this morality and this personal code that they can hold on to will maintain their resilience more easily. So if you need to think of a teacher who has the ideals of what a resilient teacher looks like, these are those kinds of qualities you're looking for. So as you're working this week and next week with your teachers, consider who has these resilient qualities, who's struggling with them, and where are they struggling? Now, just as there's factors that promote resilience, there's also factors that can damage and harm resilience. There's just as with the factors that promote it, there's personal and contextual factors. Those personal factors that can lead to a struggle with resilience are things like negative self-beliefs, difficulties in seeking help, conflicts between personal beliefs and school prioritized practices. This is something that I know I've personally felt many times. When you start to hear a teacher talk about themselves, I can't get the kids to succeed. I can't get them to do X, Y, and Z. I can't keep coming to work every day. These are the kinds of negative self-beliefs and negative self-talk that can demonstrate that this is someone who might be struggling with some resilience. When you're also seeing someone who is really pushing back against those school prioritized ideals because their own personal beliefs conflict with that, that's someone who's going to have a hard time maintaining resilience. Then, of course, there's contextual factors for resilience. Things like disruptive student behavior. We all have experienced students who really challenged us behaviorally. At the end of the day, we would feel far more exhausted than normal after having dealt with those behaviors. That's a symptom of that resilience being whittled away as we're being dragged down and bogged down by that. We also have the idea of duties that are directly related to teaching. So when teachers feel as though there's a lot being piled on, more and more and more, that doesn't exactly relate to the instruction that they're giving. That's going to make it harder for them to maintain. We also have demoralizing political demands. When we're looking at the larger political picture and hearing politicians talk about educators and education and teachers, that language of we need reform in education because teachers are failing our kids, or seeing budget cut after budget cut. These are things that demoralize us and bring us down and harm our resilience because it's hard to continue on and to push forward when the world around us seems to push back. And then we also have that idea of a lack of support from school administration. This can be something that's either real or perceived. When we're not feeling that full support from the people around us and the people above us, it can make it very hard to go to work and maintain that resilience piece. So these are factors to keep an eye out for as well. Just as we want to make sure that we have those contextual factors that promote resilience, we want to keep an eye out for these contextual factors that can harm resilience. Because while we can't control personal factors for every teacher, we as leaders can help to address those contextual factors. So I'm going to ask you to type in the chat in just a moment and consider this. If these are the qualities of a resilient teacher, someone who's insightful, determined, creative, they take initiative, they have persistence, optimism, humor, and a moral personal code, then how can you start to identify a teacher who's struggling with resilience in your school? I want you to just take a moment to reflect on that and then type into the chat what you think. I see that idea of negativity. Now that idea of negativity is also addressed in some of Elena Aguilar's writing on coaching. And there's definitely a fine line to walk when we're thinking about constructive negativity and negativity that's harmful to a person. The idea of being distant. Oftentimes when someone is struggling with resilience, they will intentionally create distance between themselves and others, often driven by that negative self-belief. Someone who may seem bitter, they have a lot of self-doubt and they give up. Not working with others. These are really good ideas, and they're things that we definitely want to be considering as we look at our teachers. And also consider, oftentimes when we see someone who's maybe bitter or having a lot of self-doubt or might lash out towards others, that's oftentimes not something that's symptomatic of them being a hateful person or someone who's really mean and rude. That is a symptom of someone who's struggling with their own resilience. So that internal struggle shows externally in their relationships with others. Awesome, awesome reflections. So then let's look at what the research says about how we can begin to identify teachers who struggle with finding resilience. And now I want you to consider this as well as not just an assessment of your peers and the people you work with, but consider reflecting on it yourself and think of times when you may have struggled with some of these things. So for example, when teachers demonstrate a fixed mindset, I can't grow beyond these limits. I can't learn technology. I can't use this rubric. That fixed mindset really demonstrates a struggle there. That inability to seek help, being stuck in their bubble, not willing to seek help from others. Feeling pessimistic. Like I said before, I'm a very pessimistic person. So I'm someone that can be often confused with someone who struggles with resilience. And that pessimism is a bit of a fine line to walk. But when you see someone who is absolutely burning out, they have a hard time feeling empathy for their students, they're not adapting well to change, and they're giving up or shutting down, these ideas all together can help build into someone who is really having a hard time. So if you're seeing teachers who are struggling with maintaining or finding resiliency, they're going to be more likely to feel unhappy with work. They're going to struggle with their student behaviors. They're going to appear more withdrawn. And these are all things that you all were pointing out in the chat. Excellent stuff. There are also teachers that when change is brought forth and when they're faced with the need to rapidly change their instructional style, they're the ones who are going to struggle the most. They're going to feel frustrated and overwhelmed. And those are the voices that are saying, not one more thing. I can't handle one more thing. A lot of folks, when we were presenting on social and emotional learning and the 3 R's, the ones that were coming to us and saying, I can't do this because it's one more thing added to my plate, those were the ones that I knew to kind of talk to from a viewpoint of resilience and to work with them to see it not just as one more thing, but as something that can help. And that's something to consider as we communicate as leaders with our teachers. If we're hearing this kind of language, if we're seeing these kinds of behaviors, then we need to bend how we're speaking to teachers and think about how we can refer to their emotional state and helping them rather than putting more on. So now we come to the place of thinking about how we can begin to address resilience. When we come at this with a viewpoint of sensitivity and a great deal of empathy, we can begin to help one another to build and maintain resilience. Resilience is one of those things that psychologically demands community. It means that we need to form relationships if we're struggling with resilience. And oftentimes that's the last thing we want to do when we're feeling non-resilient. So as long as we're approaching this with a lot of empathy and care, we can begin to help each other. So as we were going through the research, and trust me, I think Anna can attest to this, there were probably about 12 research articles that we went through in our Google Drive, all about teacher resilience from around the world. There were really 3 kinds of areas that we were able to break our resilience coping strategies down into. The first was mindfulness, the second is self-care, and the third is leadership. That third leadership piece is where you come in and also where your administration plays a role. But first, let's talk about that mindfulness piece. Now, there is a wealth of research around the idea of mindfulness. So much so that researching mindfulness in schools is almost overwhelming. But there is a cool amount of research, like this little pocket that's specifically aimed at teachers and mindfulness and how it improves teachers' practice. And the results are really great. When teachers practice mindfulness in one way or another, however they see fit, a lot of great things happen, including reducing racial bias, slowing teachers' responses to stressful situations so that they can better assess what's going on, and also just in general, being more aware of your emotional state and addressing that emotional state more effectively. Mindfulness, according to this quote, which is a beautiful quote on mindfulness, is awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present, non-judgmentally, in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So that graphic there is really helpful. It's this combination of your awareness, that non-judgmental observation, and being in the present moment that creates a mindful state. And there are a lot of ways to do this. There's breathing practices, there's videos, there's YouTube audio things that you can follow along with. You can even ask if you have an Alexa device in your home to help you with a mindfulness activity. Essentially, though, it's directing your attention in 1 to 2 of the following ways, such as your breath, the sensations of your body, an experience that you're having, a feeling or an emotion, or other attentional anchors. Some people do pressure points. Some people have a fidget that they work with. Any way that you are directing your full attention to 1 or 2 of those things, you're practicing mindfulness. Now, it can really be beneficial for your teachers to designate time either in their working time with kids or on their own to practice some mindfulness. This last year, I've made a direct intention of practicing mindfulness at the end of every day of work, no matter how I decide to do it, usually with some meditative yoga or something like that. But that intention has really helped to process my day and to help me feel rejuvenated rather than weighed down by the events of the day. Now, the other research on this that's really important is that if teachers practice mindfulness on a regular basis, then their overall ability to maintain resilience increases. So if we're able to help teach teachers more about mindfulness, bring in some of these ideas into the classroom and into our times together as peers, then we can begin to see better resilience overall among our staff. And at the end of the day, that would be such a great goal to meet, having a whole staff that's resilient. And mindfulness can be one piece of that. Now, another idea that's often kind of spoken about is the idea of self-care. Self-care is a hashtag, it's everywhere, it's kind of meaningless at this point. But really, it's the practice of taking action to preserve and improve and prioritize your own mental and physical health. There's so many ways to do this, whether you're setting boundaries and practicing those boundaries, setting a good schedule for sleep, food, exercise, any of the above, engaging activities that make you laugh, whatever it might be. There's a lot of ways to practice self-care. One of the things that I find most important about it is that it is an intentional practice. It's not something that you can do casually and kind of hope that it'll happen on its own. Self-care is something that is very intentional and purposeful. It's an activity that you perform with the goal of helping yourself to be more mentally and physically healthy. So promoting opportunities for self-care with your staff can be excellent. Now, this last piece is, in my mind, one of the most complex because it's the idea of leadership. When teachers are provided with opportunities for leadership and agency, then their resilience improves. This is something that is well researched and well known. You are all, though, in a unique position of leadership among your schools. This provides you with an opportunity to help others with their resilience in a way that most people in schools don't. In this context, we're thinking of leadership as a way of modeling, coaching, and providing opportunities to learn about resilience. So you can do this as a leader in many ways. You can promote resilience by demonstrating with your staff active coping strategies. Take 5 minutes in a staff meeting and say, hey, here's my coping strategy for the day that I want to share. It can also be providing space for others to learn from your example or just to talk. Provide space for relationship building among your staff. Imagine having a weekly office hours for a mindfulness moment with your staff so that anyone who wants to participate can come in, do a mindfulness activity with you, and just socialize for a bit. It can also be setting up a safe space for support. Oftentimes, when teachers are struggling with resilience, they feel unsafe in their school space. So setting up an opportunity, a space, an area, a time when teachers are safe to come to you with whatever they're dealing with, even if it's just to voice their concerns, can be something that can build their resilience. And of course, there's the modeling piece. That's setting boundaries, practicing optimism, seeking help from others yourself. And then one of my favorites as well is recognizing strengths in others. Oftentimes those teachers that are struggling the most with resilience are the ones that are practicing a lot of negative self-talk. And so when someone recognizes a strength in them, it's something that builds them up little by little. We do the same thing with our students all the time. We see a student who's struggling in math and has that mindset of, I'll never be good at this. I suck at math. We start to recognize little strengths that they have. Well, actually, you're really good at dividing. That's a strength of yours that not everybody has. The same is true of our teachers. Practice finding strengths in teachers and actively recognizing them. So we're getting to the end of our time. So I wanted to say first off, thank you so much for being here and for participating in this. I deeply appreciate your presence here, and it makes me really excited how many people were able to come. And remember, the BSS team is here to support you and your staff in any way that you might need. Behavior kind of fits into a lot of different areas. So if you need help with your staff in practicing behavior support habits, in resilience, and much more, please reach out to us. We're here for you. You can email us at bss@aps.edu. I also have a link here, and you'll be able to access this presentation, so you can access this link for a quick form to access to understand your own resilience. So that's just a quick self-assessment of resilience so that you can see where you are and maybe pass it out to your staff members so that they can see theirs as well. Remember to fill out the form at the end of the day for feedback. We'd love to hear your feedback on any and all the presentations. And again, thank you for coming. I'm really excited that you were here. You guys take care too. Have a restful, wonderful, lovely day.